The clock ticked softly in the corner of the quiet cafe, the kind of silence that amplifies loneliness. Laura Bennett, 51, stared at her untouched cappuccino as the city buzzed faintly outside the fog window. It had been almost a year since her divorce, a polite, civilized ending to a long, exhausted marriage. She had told her friends she was fine, that she was focusing on her art classes, her garden, her peace. But deep down, the quiet had begun to ache. That's when Daniel Cross walked into her life. He wasn't someone you could easily ignore. Tall, confident, with the casual grace of a man used to being noticed. His laughter rolled across the room as he greeted the charity organizers. Laura recognized him from the event poster, CEO of Cross Maritime Holdings. His donations had kept the local arts foundation alive, but it was his eyes that drew her attention now, blue-gray, intelligent, and dangerously curious. When their eyes met across the room, she looked away first. She always did. But a few minutes later, he was standing at her table, introducing himself with effortless charm. "You're Laura Bennett, right? The artist behind the Solitude series?" "That was a long time ago," she murmured, embarrassed that he even remembered. He smiled, the kind that disarmed caution. "Then I guess it's time for a new one." They talked about art, the ocean, and second chances. Daniel spoke with warmth, but there was something else beneath it, a kind of calculation she couldn't name. By the time dessert was served, he had already convinced her to attend a weekend yacht party he was hosting. A little escape for creative souls, he called it. Laura hesitated. She didn't know these people, and she'd never been the impulsive type. But something about Daniel's easy confidence filled a void she hadn't realized had grown so large. "You deserve a break," he said softly. "Let the sea clear your head." The sea. She had always loved the sea, its mystery, its stillness, its promise of forgetting. That night, she stood by her bedroom window, the city lights flickering in the distance, holding the glossy black invitation Daniel had sent to her phone. The Silver Mirage, it read, with coordinates and departure time. Elegant, simple, and strangely alluring. Her best friend Mara had called earlier, warning her to take it slow, reminding her that loneliness can make anyone reckless. But Laura told herself this wasn't recklessness. It was healing. The next morning, she packed lightly, a white sundress, a sketchbook, sunscreen, and a single photograph of her daughter from years ago. She told herself it was just a weekend, a harmless adventure. Still, when she arrived at the marina, the vastness of the yacht made her heart stutter. The Silver Mirage gleamed under the sunlight, sleek and imposing, surrounded by laughter and champagne glasses clinking in the distance. A small crew moved with professional precision, and Daniel stood at the top of the deck, waving as though she were the guest of honor. "Welcome aboard, Laura," he called, his smile bright against the blue horizon. For a fleeting moment, as the wind brushed her hair and gulls circled overhead, Laura allowed herself to believe she had stepped into a new chapter, one where the past had finally faded into salt and sunlight. She didn't notice the way Daniel's smile lingered too long, or how a woman in dark sunglasses on the upper deck, Evelyn Stone, though Laura didn't know her name yet, watched silently, her expression unreadable. The yacht's engines roared to life, cutting through the water. The city shrank behind them. Ahead, the open sea shimmered like glass, beautiful and endless. And somewhere, beneath that beauty, something waited. The moment the Silver Mirage pushed beyond the harbor and into open waters, Laura felt her world tilt. Not just from the gentle sway of the yacht, but from the sheer unreality of it all. The air was warmer here, cleaner, salted with promise. She stood near the rail, watching the foam trail behind them, the city shrinking into a hazy line of memory. Daniel moved easily among his guests, greeting them like a practiced host. He laughed, touched shoulders, poured drinks, the kind of charm that made people lean closer. Every gesture was smooth, deliberate, effortless. "First time sailing?" he asked when he joined her at the bow. "First time on something this beautiful," she admitted, shielding her eyes from the glare. "Then we'll make it memorable." His words floated between them, pleasant on the surface, but heavy with something she couldn't quite define. The yacht gleamed in the late afternoon sun, all white marble and polished wood, a small kingdom adrift. The music played softly from hidden speakers, something jazzy and slow. Waiters moved about with trays of fruit and champagne. Everything was designed to make guests forget the world beyond the waves. Daniel introduced her to the others. There was Evelyn Stone, the poised woman Laura had noticed earlier, late 30s, elegant, with a cool smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She claimed to be Daniel's assistant, but her tone carried an intimacy that didn't sound professional. Evelyn shook Laura's hand gently and held it a second too long. "You're the artist Daniel mentioned," Evelyn said, her voice smooth as silk. "I've always admired people who create beauty. It's such a rare skill." Laura smiled politely, though something about the way Evelyn said beauty felt like a warning. Then came Mark Vance, a freelance photographer hired to document the trip, or so he said. He was younger, easygoing, with a restless kind of energy and a camera that never left his side. He snapped photos of everything: the sea, the guests, even Laura when she wasn't looking. "Don't worry," Mark grinned when she caught him. "Just capturing the atmosphere. You fit right in." She didn't feel like she fit in. Not at all. Hours passed in a golden blur. They ate on the upper deck as the sky turned amber. Daniel seated at the head of the table, spinning stories of his travels and investments. Every so often, Evelyn leaned close to whisper in his ear. Laura pretended not to notice. Mark sat across from her, occasionally rolling his eyes when Daniel bragged too much. His subtle humor made her relax, until Daniel noticed their quiet exchange. His smile faltered. "Careful, Laura," Daniel joked, though his eyes were cold. Mark has a habit of making people fall for him on camera. The table laughed, but the tension that followed was imaginary. As dusk deepened, Daniel invited her to the deck. The ocean stretched endlessly, reflecting ribbons of purple and fire. For a moment, she forgot her unease. She even smiled. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Almost unreal," Daniel said. "You'd be surprised how peaceful it feels, being far from everything that complicates life." Laura nodded, watching the horizon. She didn't see Evelyn behind them, her expression tight as she watched the two together. Later, as night draped itself over the water, lanterns flickered to life across the deck. Laughter filled the air, but Laura felt strangely detached, as if she were observing a play rather than living it. The waves whispered beneath them, steady and secretive. She noticed Evelyn and Daniel talking quietly near the stairs, their faces close, their voices sharp. The laughter around her faded into a dull hum. Something in Daniel's posture, a subtle tension, told her that the party's brightness was just a mask. When he returned to her, his smile was perfect again. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. "Of course," he said. "Just business." But Laura could tell business wasn't what had darkened his eyes. Later that night, when she finally slipped away to her cabin, she paused by the window. The sea shimmered under the moonlight, endless and unknowable. Somewhere above deck, a door slammed, followed by muffled voices. Her heart quickened, a chill creeping through the warm night air. She told herself it was just the wind, just the sounds of the ship adjusting to the sea. But deep down, she already knew something beneath this perfect surface was shifting. And once the water hides something, it rarely gives it back. The second evening unfolded with a strange elegance. Soft music, candles flickering in the sea breeze, and the gentle clinking of wine glasses that tried too hard to sound carefree. The sun had long disappeared beneath the waves, leaving behind a violet horizon that seemed to swallow the yacht whole. Laura sat at the long mahogany table on the upper deck, surrounded by laughter that felt slightly too rehearsed. The first night's warmth had cooled. The guests spoke in softer tones, their eyes darting toward Daniel more often than toward each other. Daniel, as always, was at the center. His charm hadn't faded. It had sharpened. He poured wine for everyone himself, teasing and smiling, the perfect host. Yet Laura noticed a subtle tension in his jaw, the flicker of something hard beneath the surface. Evelyn sat to his right, her glass half full, her smile brittle. Whenever Daniel touched Laura's hand or leaned in to speak, Evelyn's knuckles whitened around her wine stem. "You seem quiet tonight," Daniel said, glancing at Laura. "The sea usually brings out stories." Laura smiled faintly. "I think I'm still learning how to listen to it." Mark chuckled from across the table. "Careful," he said, swirling his glass. "The sea listens back. You never know what it'll keep." The words lingered. Daniel's gaze cut briefly toward him, sharp as a blade. The dinner went on, courses arriving with delicate precision: grilled lobster, citrus salad, and finally, dark chocolate mousse that no one really tasted. Conversation turned to art, travel, and danger. Someone mentioned a tourist who'd gone missing from a cruise the year before, and laughter followed. But Laura noticed Daniel didn't laugh. Instead, he poured himself another glass, the wine sloshing slightly over the rim. "People disappear all the time," he said quietly. "Sometimes because they want to." No one replied. Evelyn looked away. Mark adjusted his camera beside him, pretending to check the settings. The air grew thicker, saltier. Later, after dinner, Daniel led everyone below deck for drinks in a lounge, a space of dim amber lights, leather seats, and music soft enough to encourage secrets. Laura lingered near the bar, her glass untouched. Mark joined her, leaning casually against the counter. "He's quite a presence, isn't he?" Mark said under his breath. "He's intense," Laura admitted, "but generous." "Generous men with yachts," Mark muttered. "There's always a price." Before Laura could reply, Daniel's voice sliced through the air. "Mark, come join us. You don't get paid to flirt." The tension that followed was cold and immediate. Mark raised his hands in mock surrender and walked back toward the others. Evelyn's eyes tracked every movement, her expression unreadable. Hours later, most of the guests had drifted off to their cabins. Laura found herself alone on the deck, the air heavy with salt and unease. Below, she could still hear muffled laughter, Daniel's voice mingling with Evelyn's. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp, almost pleading. She moved quietly toward the sound. The cabin door was slightly ajar. Through the narrow slit, she saw Daniel gripping Evelyn's arm, his voice low but fierce. "You promised me this would stay between us." "She doesn't even know who you are," Evelyn whispered. "Let it go, Daniel." Laura froze, heart hammering. Evelyn's tone wasn't that of an assistant. It was personal, broken. Daniel's reply came like steel. "If she finds out, it ends badly. For everyone." Laura stepped back, the door creaking faintly beneath her weight. Silence followed. Then Daniel's voice, soft again, almost sweet, floated out. "Laura? Still awake?" She turned, forcing a smile as he appeared in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, though his eyes glinted in the low light. "Just getting some air," she said, quickly. "Good," he murmured. "It's easy to lose yourself out here. Stay close." He smiled then, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Laura returned to her cabin, locking the door this time. Her pulse wouldn't slow. She thought of Evelyn's trembling voice, of Daniel's threat. She glanced out the porthole, the dark water reflecting the cabin's dim glow. The ocean looked calm, almost kind, but it felt like it was watching. She reached for her phone. No signal. Just the sound of waves brushing against the hull, like whispers in the dark. And somewhere above deck, footsteps moved slowly across the wood. By dawn, the air had changed. The calm shimmer of the previous day was gone, replaced by low clouds that bruised the sky and a wind that carried whispers across the deck. Laura stood by her window, watching waves darken under the growing storm. The sea, once soothing, now seemed alive with warning. She hadn't slept. Every creak of a yacht had sounded like footsteps outside her door. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. Stay close. It wasn't protection he had offered. It was possession. When she finally stepped out of her cabin, the corridors were empty. Coffee cups rattled softly on a nearby table as the yacht tilted with each swell. Evelyn appeared at the far end of the passageway, pale and tense, holding a clipboard she wasn't reading. "Rough morning," Laura said carefully. Evelyn forced a smile. "The sea's just temperamental." But her voice trembled slightly, and Laura caught the faint mark on her wrist. A dark bruise, small but fresh. "Did you?" "It's nothing," Evelyn interrupted. "Daniel doesn't like guests worrying." That name hung in the air like a crack of thunder. Evelyn turned away before Laura could reply, her heels clicking quickly down the hall. On deck, Daniel stood near the helm, hair tousled by the wind, a picture of control. He smiled when he saw her, but there was something in his eyes, red-rimmed, sharp, restless. A man who hadn't slept either. "You should stay inside," he said, raising his voice over the wind. "It's not safe out here when the weather turns." "I'll be fine," she replied, gripping the railing. "I like the sea like this. Honest." He laughed, but it wasn't genuine. "Honest? The sea hides everything, Laura. That's what makes it perfect." The word sent a chill through her stronger than the cold air. They spent the day adrift in uneasy silence. The storm worsened by afternoon, rain tapping like fingers on the glass, thunder growling somewhere distant. The guests huddled inside, the yacht swaying harder with every wave. At dinner, the tension that had been brewing finally broke. The storm outside roared, plates trembling on the table. Daniel drank heavily, his composure slipping. Evelyn sat quietly beside him, eyes lowered. Mark cracked a joke to lighten the mood, but Daniel's glare silenced him instantly. "Something funny, Mark?" Daniel asked, voice low and sharp. "Just try and distract from the weather. Maybe focus on your job instead. Or is taking pictures of my guests more interesting than doing your work?" The tone was venomous. Laura looked at Evelyn, who stared into her glass, pretending not to hear. "Daniel," Laura began softly, "it's just a joke." He turned to her so suddenly she flinched. "You don't know him like I do." The room fell quiet except for the drumming of rain. For the first time, Laura saw something terrifying in him. Not anger, but pleasure in the way fear rippled through the people around him. Evelyn stood abruptly. "I think we should all get some rest." Daniel didn't respond. He just stared out the window, where lightning split the sky into white shards. Later that night, Laura lay awake, listening to the storm. Somewhere above, a door slammed, and footsteps, running. Voices rose in the wind, Daniel's and Evelyn's, sharp and panicked. Then a sound, a heavy thud, followed by silence. Laura rushed to her cabin door, but stopped, her hand hovering over the handle. She could hear Daniel breathing hard just beyond it, muttering something she couldn't make out. Then, slow footsteps receded down the hall. She waited, heart pounding, until the yacht rocked hard enough to send a glass crashing from her shelf. When she finally dared to step into the corridor, it was empty. Only the storm spoke, howling and merciless. Somewhere below deck, she thought she heard Evelyn crying. Or maybe it was just the sea. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world unervingly still. The sea lay flat and gray, like polished metal, and the air carried a hollow quiet that follows chaos. Laura woke to the faint creak of the yacht rocking gently, sunlight slipping through the blinds and pale ribbons. For a few moments, she didn't remember where she was. The night felt like a fever dream, the shouting, the thud, the silence that had followed. But when she sat up, her stomach turned. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier, as if it carried a secret. She dressed quickly and stepped into the corridor. The hallways were deserted. A mug lay shattered near the stairs. Coffee dried into a dark stain. From above deck came muffled voices, Daniel's among them, sharp and controlled. She climbed the steps, heart pounding. Daniel stood near the railing, his shirt untucked, his hair wind-tossed, his expression unreadable. Evelyn was there too, pale and shaking, one arm wrapped around herself. A member of the crew hovered nearby, looking lost. "What's going on?" Laura asked, breathless. Evelyn's lips trembled. "It's Mark," she whispered. "He's gone." Laura blinked. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" Daniel turned to her, voice measured and calm. Too calm. "He must have fallen overboard during the storm. The weather was brutal last night. I warned him not to stay on deck." The words fell like stones in water. "You think he just fell?" Laura pressed. "No one saw anything?" Daniel's gaze flickered toward Evelyn. "We've checked his cabin. His bag's still there, but he's not. It's tragic, but accident happen, especially when people drink." Laura looked at Evelyn, whose eyes glistened with unspoken fear. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. Then she looked at Daniel and said nothing at all. The crew began searching the yacht, the cabins, storage rooms, even the engine area. Laura helped, her pulse roaring in her ears. She called Mark's name again and again, her voice echoing through the metal corridors. No answer, only the rhythmic groan of the yacht against the waves. When she returned to the deck, she caught sight of something dark near the railing, a faint smear along the polished wood. She moved closer. It was small but unmistakable. Blood. Her breath hitched. "Daniel," she called, pointing. "Here. What is this?" He was beside her in an instant, his hand gripping her arm too tightly. "Don't start imagining things," he said softly, almost kindly. "You're frightened. We all are. But the storm threw things around. Someone could have been injured. That's all." Laura pulled away, uneasy. His voice had that same false gentleness she'd heard the night before. By noon, Daniel contacted the Coast Guard through the yacht's radio. His voice was composed as he explained the tragic accident, how Mark must have slipped in the storm. He gave coordinates, details, and just enough sorrow to sound believable. When the call ended, he turned to Laura and Evelyn. "We'll wait for the search team," he said. "But there's no point panicking. It won't bring him back." Then, quieter, as he looked directly at Laura, "And I suggest we don't say anything that might complicate things. The media loves stories like this." Laura felt the threat beneath the words, velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. Evelyn nodded silently, eyes fixed on the horizon. Laura wanted to scream, to demand answers, but something in Daniel's stare froze her in place. That night, after the sun sank into the sea, Laura sat alone in her cabin. She couldn't stop thinking about the mark on the railing, the blood that Daniel had dismissed. Her hands shook as she reached for the small bag of Mark's belongings she retrieved earlier, things the crew had collected to keep safe. Inside were his wallet, a notebook, and his camera. The lens was cracked, the casing scratched, but the memory card was still inside. Laura hesitated, then slid it into her tablet. The images loaded slowly. Waves, sunset, laughter, the deck lights glowing. Then her stomach dropped. The final set of photos showed the night of the storm, blurred shots of the deck, people mid-motion, and then Daniel and Mark near the railing. They were arguing. Daniel's face was tight, furious. The next image was chaos, motion blur, a flash of lightning, a smear of red. Then nothing. Laura's hands trembled so violently she almost dropped the tablet. She looked toward the door, half expecting Daniel to appear again, smiling that perfect, empty smile. The storm might have passed, but something darker was just beginning to rise. Outside, the ocean was calm, too calm, a deceptive stillness after violence. Laura backed away from the light, clutching the tablet to her chest. In the silence, she heard a faint sound above deck. Footsteps again, slow and deliberate, and Daniel's voice low, almost whispering to someone unseen. "We'll have to keep this quiet until we reach the coast." Her heart thudded painfully. She knew now Mark hadn't fallen. The next morning dawned bright and cruelly calm, the kind of clear day that felt like mockery after what had happened. The storm was gone, but its ghost lingered in the silence of the Silver Mirage. Every sound, every creak of the hull, every whisper of the wind carried weight. Laura hadn't slept. The images from Mark's camera haunted her, the confrontation, the flash, the blur of motion that ended everything. She had spent the night replaying them over and over until her eyes burned. She knew what she'd seen, and she knew Daniel's version of events was a lie. When she finally stepped onto the deck, the world felt unnaturally still. Daniel stood by the helm, speaking into the radio again, his tone calm, authoritative. Evelyn sat nearby, motionless, her face pale beneath oversized sunglasses. The other guests, two couples who had joined from Daniel's business circle, hovered awkwardly, whispering in the corners. Everyone was waiting for someone to tell them what to believe. "The Coast Guard confirmed they'll reach us within a few hours," Daniel said as he turned to face them. His voice was smooth, perfectly measured. "They'll want statements, but I'll handle most of it. Just stay consistent. The storm was rough, visibility was poor, and Mark had been drinking. We did everything we could." His gaze flicked to Laura, sharp and deliberate. "Right." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Right." Her throat felt dry, her voice too small. Daniel smiled faintly, satisfied. Good. We need to remain calm. Accidents happen, but hysteria ruins reputations. There was not grief, not guilt, but reputation. Everything about him was about control. Every word felt rehearsed, the rhythm of a man accustomed to bending the truth until it served him. As the others dispersed, Evelyn approached Laura quietly, holding a glass of water. Her hands shook as she passed it over. "Drink," she whispered. "You look faint." Laura studied her face, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the tremor in her voice. "Evelyn," she said softly, "what really happened last night?" Evelyn froze. For a heartbeat, her mask slipped. "You don't want to know." "I already do." Evelyn's eyes darted toward the helm, where Daniel stood with his back to them, speaking to the captain. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "He loses control when people defy him. It's happened before. That's why She stopped herself, swallowing hard. "Don't make him angry, Laura. Please." Before Laura could press further, Daniel's voice cut across the deck. "Everything all right over there?" Evelyn stepped back immediately. "Just making sure she's hydrated," she called. Her tone was steady again, but her eyes pleaded. "Don't say anything." Daniel walked toward them, his smile practiced and charming. "You're a good friend, Evelyn." His gaze slid to Laura. "And you? I hope you're starting to feel better." Shock does strange things to people. His words hung in the air, gentle, but with a blade beneath. As the day dragged on, the yacht drifted lazily under the sun. Daniel instructed the crew to clean the decks, remove any signs of storm. Laura watched them scrub the railing where she had seen the blood. It was gone within minutes, erased as if it had never existed. Every move Daniel made was deliberate, methodical. He poured drinks for the guests, laughed at small jokes, even played soft music through speakers. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked like a group trying to heal after tragedy. But to Laura, it felt like a performance, and Daniel was directing every scene. After lunch, she slipped below deck with the excuse of resting. She closed the door behind her and pulled out the tablet again. She needed to protect the memory card. It was the only proof left, but she couldn't risk Daniel finding it. Her hands shook as she removed the card and hid it inside the lining of her sketchbook, behind a watercolor she had painted that morning. She stared at it, her mind racing. Should she confront Evelyn? Or wait for the Coast Guard and hand it over? Then she heard it. Daniel's voice outside the door, muffled but unmistakable. "Keep her calm," he was saying. "She's fragile. People like that break easily. We don't need another scene." Evelyn murmured something Laura couldn't make out. Footsteps faded. Laura pressed a hand to her chest, forcing herself to breathe. The sea outside sparkled as if nothing had happened, as if it hadn't swallowed a manhole. But beneath the calm, everything was tightening. Daniel's grip, Evelyn's fear, Laura's quiet determination. When she returned to the deck later, Daniel was smiling again, his charm effortless as he poured her a glass of wine. "To peace," he said, raising his glass, and moving forward. Laura hesitated before clinking her glass against his. "To the truth," she whispered. Daniel's smile flickered for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, Laura knew he understood that she wasn't convinced. The wind picked up, gentle but insistent, tugging at her hair. Somewhere in the distance, a faint hum of an approaching boat could be heard. The Coast Guard. Daniel turned toward the sound, his expression unreadable. "Right on time," he murmured. Laura forced herself to stay calm. She had proof. She had a choice. But she didn't yet realize the most dangerous part wasn't over. It was just beginning. The sharp whine of the approaching engines cut through the sea air like a blade. The Coast Guard was nearing. Daniel straightened his collar, his charm snapping back into place like armor. Every gesture, every word seemed choreographed, the performance of an innocent man about to be interviewed. Laura stood near the railing, her fingers gripping it so tightly that her knuckles whitened. The yacht's gleaming surface reflected a reality she didn't recognize anymore. Smiles that had fear, laughter that covered guilt. Evelyn stood beside her, silent, eyes fixed on the water. "They'll ask questions," Laura murmured. "They always do," Evelyn replied softly. Just don't give them the wrong answers. Laura turned to her. You mean Daniel's answers? Evelyn didn't respond. She simply pressed her lips together, as if silence could protect her from what was coming. Minutes later, 2 Coast Guard officers boarded the yacht. The taller one introduced himself as Officer Reed. His tone was polite, but his gaze was sharp, moving over every face like a blade over glass. We received your distress call, Mr. Harland, Reed said to Daniel. You reported a man missing, Mark Daniels? Daniel nodded, his expression perfectly measured. Yes, he went overboard during the storm last night. We did everything we could, but the waves were impossible. He didn't stand a chance. His voice trembled just enough to sound real. Laura almost believed him. Almost. The officers began asking questions. Where everyone had been, what they had seen, how much Mark had been drinking. Daniel guided every response, subtly correcting details, reminding the guests of the chaos and the lack of visibility. It was masterful, controlled, deliberate. When Reed turned to Laura, she felt Daniel's eyes on her. Miss Parker, you were close to the victim? We spoke a few times, she replied carefully. He was a photographer. And last night, did you see what happened? Laura hesitated. She could almost feel Daniel's gaze pressing into her skin, warning her to stay quiet. It was dark, she said finally. The storm was confusing. I heard shouting, but I couldn't see clearly. Reed nodded, scribbling notes. And after he fell, Daniel tried to help. She lied. We all did. Her stomach twisted as she spoke. Each word felt heavier than the last. When the questioning ended, Reed stepped aside to speak privately with his partner. Daniel exhaled softly, flashing that effortless smile again. Well done, everyone. I know it's been difficult, but the worst is over. Laura walked away before she could say something she'd regret. She slipped below deck, her pulse racing. She had to get that memory card somewhere safe, before Daniel decided to tidy up again. In her cabin, she opened the sketchbook and ran her fingers over the watercolor painting that concealed the card. For a moment, she considered destroying it. The image of Mark falling, Evelyn's terror, Daniel's rage. Proof, dangerous proof. But then she heard voices outside, Daniel and Evelyn. She's not herself, Daniel was saying. Trauma makes people unpredictable. She's scared. Evelyn replied quietly. You can't control that. I can control what happens next. A cold shiver ran through Laura's spine. She tucked the sketchbook under her jacket and slipped out through the service corridor toward the storage deck. If she could hide the card somewhere the Coast Guard might search, it would survive even if she didn't. Rain began again, light misting as she stepped outside. The sea looked deceptively calm, the horizon gold with morning light. But every shadow felt alive with threat. She knelt beside a lifeboat, hands trembling, and wedged the sketchbook beneath the emergency radio box, hidden, but close enough that rescuers might find it if they inspected later. Just as she turned, a voice came from behind her. Looking for something, Laura? Daniel stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable, the sun glinting off his watch. Her heart stopped. I just needed air. He smiled faintly, stepping closer. You've been tense since last night. I understand. Fear makes people do strange things. She took a step back. I'm fine. Good, he said, his tone soft but chilling. Because when the Coast Guard finishes their report, we'll all go home. And I don't want anyone bringing up things that could ruin innocent lives. The word innocent twisted in his mouth like poison. He brushed past her, heading toward the upper deck. But his eyes lingered on her jacket for a moment too long. Laura waited until he was gone before collapsing against a railing, breath ragged. She had hidden the memory card, for now, but Daniel was watching her more closely than ever. By afternoon, the Coast Guard boat had vanished into the horizon, leaving the Silver Mirage once again alone on the open water. The officers had filed their report, taken polite statements, and promised to follow up when they reached land. To Daniel, it was the perfect outcome. Calm smiles, clean decks, and no evidence left behind. But for Laura, every passing wave felt like a prison wall closing in. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, too far to swim, too vast to escape. She stood by the railing, staring at the faint trail the Coast Guard vessel had left behind, fading into nothing. Her hands trembled as the reality sank in. She was still trapped with him. "They won't come back soon," Evelyn said quietly beside her, startling her. Daniel paid them enough to make sure of that. Laura turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Evelyn's gaze flicked nervously toward the upper deck, where Daniel was speaking with the captain. "He has friends in places you wouldn't believe. He knows how to make things disappear. People, problems, stories. And you stayed with him? After knowing what he's capable of?" Evelyn gave a bitter laugh. "You don't leave men like Daniel. You survive them." The words cut deeper than any confession. Laura studied Evelyn's face. The quiet exhaustion, the bruise still faintly visible beneath her makeup. Evelyn wasn't Daniel's partner anymore. She was his hostage in everything but name. A sudden metallic clang made both women flinch. Daniel descended the stairs toward them, all charm and command. "The storm damaged our comms," he announced casually. "We'll need to stay out here until the signal stabilizes." "That's convenient," Laura muttered before she could stop herself. Daniel's smile didn't waver. "You think I like being stranded in the middle of nowhere? I think you like being in control." A flicker, just a split second, broke the smooth surface of his composure. Then he laughed softly. "You've got spirit. I like that. But don't mistake this for a game." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You saw what happens when people push too far." Laura held his gaze, heart pounding but refusing to look away. "And you saw what happens when people start keeping secrets." For a heartbeat, the air between them was electric. Two storms colliding in silence. Then Daniel stepped back, the mask returning. "You're tired. Get some rest before you start imagining things." He walked away, leaving the faint smell of cologne and salt behind. Evelyn gripped Laura's wrist. "Don't provoke him again. Please." Laura pulled free. "If we don't stop him now, no one will." The rest of the afternoon stretched painfully slow. The yacht drifted lazily across a sheet of endless blue, the hum of the engines replaced by eerie quiet. Every sound, the slap of water against the hull, the cry of distant gulls, seemed magnified. Laura slipped below deck again, needing space to think. The hidden memory card weighed heavy on her conscience. It was her only leverage, her only proof. But if Daniel suspected where she'd hidden it, he'd tear the yacht apart to find it. As she passed the lounge, she froze. Daniel was inside, sitting in a leather chair, turning something over in his hands. Her sketchbook. Her heart stopped. "You're an artist," he said without looking up. "Beautiful work. Very emotional." She forced her voice steady. "You went through my things?" He looked up then, eyes cold. "I was curious. You've been distant, secretive. I thought maybe I'd missed something." "Give it back." He flipped through the pages, one by one, slowly, too slowly, until he reached the last watercolor, the one that had once concealed the card. The page was smooth, undisturbed. He looked up, smiling faintly. "Funny, I thought there'd be more." He handed it back, his fingers brushing hers in a way that made her skin crawl. "Don't hide from me, Laura. It makes you look guilty." She took the sketchbook and forced herself to walk away, her knees weak. Once in her cabin, she collapsed onto the bed, breathing hard. He hadn't found it, not yet, but he knew something. Outside, the sunlight dimmed, turning the sea into molten silver. Somewhere above, Daniel's footsteps echoed faintly, slow, deliberate, circling the deck like a predator marking territory. Laura realizing that they were no longer guests on a yacht. They were prey in a gilded trap, surrounded by nothing but water and lies. And Daniel was beginning to hunt. The sea had turned red, not literally, but in Laura's mind. Every wave carried the color of fear, every ripple the echo of what was about to happen. Night had fallen thick and heavy over the Silver Mirage. The luxury yacht, once a gleaming escape, now felt like a floating tomb. The sky was bruised purple, the air damp and metallic, and the faint taste of salt clung to Laura's lips like guilt. She sat in her cabin, the lights dimmed, clutching the sketchbook Daniel had returned to her hours ago. He hadn't found a memory card, but he knew. She could feel in the way his eyes lingered on her, how his voice softened just before it struck. Footsteps echoed faintly down the hall, slow, deliberate, then silence. Laura froze, breath held. The doorknob turned once, then stopped. After a long pause, Daniel's voice came through the door, calm and too close. "You haven't been sleeping." "Neither have you," she whispered back, though she wasn't sure why she answered. A soft chuckle. "You're smart, Laura. I like that. But curiosity can be dangerous out here." Her pulse pounded in her ears. "What did you do to him, Daniel?" "I tried to help," he said simply. "He slipped. It was tragic." "You're lying." "And what would you know about truth?" he said, his tone hardening. "You barely knew Mark, but you're acting like you lost a brother. Or maybe you just needed a story to tell, the artist with a tragic secret?" She didn't respond. The silence stretched. Then the sound of his footsteps retreated, slow, echoing, deliberate. Laura waited another minute before slipping out of her room. The hallway was empty, lit only by the cold, flickering glow of the emergency lights. She moved quickly, barefoot, heart racing. She had to reach the lower deck, the storage bay where she'd hidden the memory card. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the generator, the soft groan of the hull. When she reached the stairwell, she paused. A faint glimmer of light was moving below, a flashlight beam. Someone was already there. She descended slowly, gripping the railing, until she saw him. Daniel. He was crouched near the emergency radio box, the exact place she'd hidden the card. He was searching. "Looking for something?" she called out before she could stop herself. Daniel straightened, his flashlight swinging toward her. The beam hit her face, blinding her for a moment. Then he smiled, a calm, chilling smile. "You shouldn't be down here." "Neither should you." He stepped closer, the light trembling slightly in his hand. "You think you're clever, hiding things from me? You have no idea who I am." Laura's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "You're a murderer." The flashlight hit the floor with a clatter as Daniel lunged. She stumbled backward, slamming into a crate. His hands reached for her throat, his voice low and feral. "You could have made this easy." The struggle was chaotic, brutal, the confined space magnifying every sound. Laura grabbed the first thing she could reach, a wrench, and swung it wildly. It connected with a sickening thud. Daniel staggered back, blood blooming along his temple. For a moment, the world froze. His eyes widened, not from pain but disbelief. Then he lunged again. Laura turned and ran, feet slipping on the slick floor, the wrench clattering away. Behind her, Daniel roared her name, no longer the charming host, but the predator revealed. She burst onto the deck, gasping for air, the wind whipping her hair into her face. The sea around them churned under moonlight, black and endless. She could taste salt on her lips and blood. She didn't know whose. Somewhere behind her, Daniel's footsteps echoed again, closer this time. Laura backed toward the railing, chest heaving, eyes darting toward the lifeboats. The sea was her only escape now. "You can't hide from me," Daniel shouted. "No one will believe you." But Laura wasn't listening anymore. Her gaze caught on the dark shape of the waves below. Freedom or death, she couldn't tell which. She took one last breath, then turned, just as Daniel lunged. The impact sent both of them crashing against the railing. Metal groaned. Then a crack. One scream was swallowed by the sea. The water closed over them both, cold and endless. The dawn broke soft and deceptive, a pale, golden light spilling across the water as if the night's violence had never happened. The sea lay calm, glassy, innocent, but the Silver Mirage drifted without direction, her sails slack, her deck eerily quiet. Laura woke to the sound of gulls. Her body ached, her throat burned with salt, and her clothes clung to her like second skin. She was alive. Somehow, memory came back in fragments. The struggle, the fall, the black water swallowing her whole, Daniel's hand clawing at her wrist before slipping away beneath the waves. She had managed to grab hold of a lifeboat rope, dragging herself back aboard after what felt like hours. Now, She lay against the deck, trembling, the sun warming her face. Every breath felt borrowed. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The world swayed gently beneath her, waves rocking the yacht like a cradle. Then a sound, low, distant at first, then growing clearer. Engines. Her heart lurched. The Coast Guard. She stumbled to her feet, gripping the railing, scanning the horizon. And there it was, a white patrol vessel cutting cleanly through the morning haze, moving straight toward her. A sob of relief escaped her lips. She waved frantically, shouting until her voice cracked. Within minutes, the Coast Guard boat drew alongside. A rope ladder dropped. Officer Reed, the same man who had questioned her days ago, climbed aboard, his face grim but cautious. "Miss Parker," he called out, "we received a distress signal from this vessel again. Where's Mr. Harlan?" Laura swallowed hard, her voice raw. "Gone. He fell overboard." Reed's eyes narrowed. "When?" "Last night, during the storm. He tried to kill me." The words felt unreal even as she said them. Reed gestured to one of his men, who began securing the yacht. "You're sure?" Laura nodded weakly. "Check below deck. You'll see the blood." Reed studied her face, the cuts, the bruises, the exhaustion. Something in his expression softened. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you some water." They helped her to a seat as more officers boarded. Two disappeared below deck, while others began documenting the scene. Laura stared numbly at the horizon, where the sunlight shimmered like fire. A few minutes later, one of the officers returned, carrying a small, water-damaged sketchbook. "Found this near the radio box, sir," he said. "Looks like it was tucked under the panel." Laura's heart stopped. The sketchbook. Reed flipped through it, then paused. "There's something inside." He slid out the memory card, wrapped in a piece of paper. "What's this?" Laura's voice trembled. "Proof." She explained everything. The confrontation, Mark's death, the storm, the lies. Her words poured out in fragments between breaths, the story finally breaking free. Reed listened in silence, the weight of her voice sinking into the quiet morning air. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "We'll analyze this card once we're back on shore. If what you're saying is true, Miss Parker, this could explain a lot." "He's gone," she said softly. "The sea took him." Reed glanced toward the calm expanse of water. "Maybe, but the sea doesn't always keep what it takes." Laura frowned, unsure what he meant, until she noticed another patrol boat in the distance. The officers were hauling something from the water, tangled in ropes and seaweed. The world tilted. Her heart clenched. A body. Reed's radio crackled. "We've got a male mid-40s. No life vest. Looks like he's been in the water for hours." "Daniel." Laura turned away, the sound of her heartbeat deafening. She wanted to feel relief, justice, something, but all she felt was emptiness, and a haunting memory of his final words echoing through the night. "You think the truth will save you?" Reed placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing. Whatever happens next, you're safe now." But as she looked out across the endless sea, Laura wasn't so sure, because in her mind, she could still see Daniel's eyes, open, cold, unblinking, staring up from beneath the waves. The sun rose higher, spilling light across the deck. The officers secured the scene, the engines roared back to life, and the yacht turned toward the distant shore. For the first time in days, the land was visible, faint, golden, and far away. Laura closed her eyes, whispering into the wind, "It's over." But the sea didn't answer. Only the waves did, soft, rhythmic, and eerily like breathing. The sea had finally gone still, as if exhausted by everything it had swallowed. The Silver Mirage was docked now, motionless, surrounded by flashing lights and murmuring voices. Police, paramedics, journalists. The chaos of land felt almost alien after the eerie silence of the open water. Laura sat wrapped in a gray blanket on the pier, her gaze unfocused, watching sunlight dance on the waves. The Coast Guard had recovered the body hours ago, but it wasn't until now that they confirmed what she already knew. Daniel Harlan was dead, or so they said. The officers spoke in low tones near the covered stretcher. Laura caught fragments of conversation carried by the wind. Words like decomposition, bruising, and unidentifiable. The body had been in the water too long. Salt and time had erased the details, blurred the lines. But what chilled her wasn't the uncertainty of the corpse. It was a faint whisper of doubt in Officer Reed's voice when he said, "We think it's him." Think. Evelyn sat a few feet away, her hands clasped tightly around a steaming cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked smaller now, hollowed out. The woman who once floated through the yacht with quiet grace was gone, replaced by someone who had seen too much and said too little. Laura turned to her. "You're free now." Evelyn's eyes flicked up. "Empty. Free," she repeated softly. "From Daniel, maybe, but not from what he left behind. He can't hurt you anymore." Evelyn gave a brittle laugh. "You don't understand. Daniel didn't just control people. He controlled stories. The ones people tell and the ones they bury." Laura frowned. "What do you mean?" Evelyn hesitated, then pulled something from her coat pocket, a silver ring, simple but elegant, engraved on the inside. "They said the body was his," she whispered. "But this was on my cabin table when they found me. He never took it off." The word struck like a cold wave. "You think he's alive?" Evelyn's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "I think the sea doesn't take what it still needs." Before Laura could respond, Officer Reed approached. His face was drawn, his expression careful. "Miss Parker," he said, "we've reviewed part of the footage from the memory card." Her stomach tightened. "And it corroborates most of your account. The argument, the fall." But he paused. "The last seconds are damaged. The storm cut the feed. It's hard to tell who pushed who." Laura blinked, disbelief flooding through her. "You think I—" Reed raised a hand. "No one's saying that. But you need to understand, legally it's complicated. The press is already asking questions. You'll need to stay in town until we finish the full investigation." The world tilted again. After everything, she still wasn't free. Reed nodded toward the covered body. "We'll run DNA tests to confirm the identity. Once that's done, you'll be contacted." As he walked away, Laura's eyes followed him to the stretcher. The tide lapped softly against the pier, each wave dragging fragments of foam back into the depths, as if the sea was whispering not yet. That night, she was placed in a seaside guest house under quiet police supervision. From her window, she could see the dark shape of the Silver Mirage anchored in the harbor, swaying gently with the tide. It looked almost peaceful now, the scene of so much horror disguised as luxury again. But she couldn't sleep. The storm outside had passed, yet her mind was louder than any thunder. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Every distant sound of the waves brought back Daniel's voice, his calm whisper. "You think the truth will save you?" Near midnight, a soft knock came at her door. Laura's breath caught. "Who is it?" Silence. Then faintly, almost lost beneath the sound of the surf, a man's voice. "You left something behind, Laura." Her heart stopped. She rushed to the window, but the street below was empty. Only the wind and the sea replied. Down at the harbor, a light flickered briefly aboard the Silver Mirage. One single cabin light, Daniel's old quarters, glowing in the dark. Laura pressed a trembling hand to the glass. The tide below shimmered under moonlight, rolling in and out, steady and knowing. The sea was whispering again, the same rhythm she had heard that first night on the yacht. And this time, it almost sounded like laughter.